So you meet a lot of people out there in the ecosystem, and people approach, and they're interested. They've got an idea for a business. Why do you think there's that attraction to be an entrepreneur? Why do you think so many people in our universe are attracted to becoming an entrepreneur? I mean, they make a lot of money. That's the dream, I suppose.
I think they're the right reasons and the wrong reasons. And one of the things that I like to do is to ferret out what those reasons are. So I have memories of and stories of entrepreneurs that I've asked that question to that surprised themselves when they had to answer it honestly. Because usually people want to be an entrepreneur because of two things. They have a great idea and they don't like the life they're in. So they envision this idea of bringing them into a new life where either they or somebody else finances their way into success. And then success means lifestyle changes. Success means freedom. And that's the usual dream. And in fact, you and I both know from our years of entrepreneurial experience that, first of all, the lifestyle of an entrepreneur typically means longer days by far. The point is that you often mortgage your home, and if you don't, you know that you're at risk from personal guarantees. And if you add all of the extra stress along with the personal guarantees and the extra hours, entrepreneurism isn't necessarily the panacea that people think it is when they're looking at a good idea and thinking it's time to go do it.
That's why I say this podcast has so much drama. When I interview these entrepreneurs, they've got their house on the line, and if they don't execute, they're going to lose their house, they're going to lose their wife.
You bet. Yes. Well, I look for passion. I mean, the whole thing gets down to passion. If they have that kind of passion and the idea is good, then we move on to all the other more substantial things. And I have a great memory of, I think the most passion I've ever seen came from the GameSpy story, which was back in 1998 when there were 8 people who were doing web design. And at 5 o'clock every evening, they would stop religiously, I mean, really stop, hard stop, and begin playing internet games. And they were using a tool that they had found and they had licensed, and they were actually putting out on the web for others to use free. And they had gathered, I think, over 1 million people coming to their website and downloading this tool. And these people were finding other players with this tool and all over the world joining into games together in what we call lobby software. Well, GameSpy built over the years into quite a big company, but that was the beginning, and that's what I saw. And it was that passion of those 8, led by an entrepreneur that really understood the game industry, but not necessarily the process of making money from it, that let us end up building what I think to be one of Orange County's largest internet businesses over time.
And as I listen to you describe that, Dave, I get this sense that entrepreneurs often experience a shifting of focus as they get started with one idea, thinking what their core competence is, and then that perhaps the marketplace is going to fine-tune that for them. You see that, I'm sure, in many of your companies.
I don't think I can name one company whose business plan I saw, or at least whose executive summary I first saw, that looks like the same company that it did back then. Not one. And so there has to be a flexibility in management. Often that means that the management has to be hit on the head by the board. Sometimes the entrepreneur has to step back into a development role or a marketing role while somebody else with a bigger vision comes aboard. But whatever it is, that original concept often doesn't survive it.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said different styles of perhaps your different management styles on the board. How would somebody describe your involvement on a board of directors, Dave? What would somebody observe about you? What's your style? How do you deal with management?
Yeah, as far as style, I like to talk to the CEOs that I'm dealing with as a board member pretty often. Short conversations, but often, so that there's a relaxed feeling that I'm the coach. I told you I'm chairman of 6. And of those 6, I'll talk to the CEO at least 3 or 4 times a week each. And the point is that with that kind of an informal conversation, you're beyond the point of defense. And you really do say what's on your mind, and that's the important thing. So these CEOs will often talk about personal problems as well as corporate problems. In many cases, fundraising is always at the top of their mind. Even if the cash-out date is 6 months to a year from now, it's still on their mind. And so that conversation comes up often.
And one of the benefits of talking that frequently is they don't have time to hide bad news or...
That's very true. And in fact, that's one of the things in being their coach that they should never do. And if somebody is going to hide things from their coach and from their board and obviously from their vice presidents or whomever else in management, they ought to at least have some kind of a roundtable organization or an informal type of organization that isn't associated with them, because nobody's going to have that kind of that kind of worry that they have to bundle up inside and not be able to find somebody to confess to, if nothing else. So I found that the best things for people are peers who can help them. And in the case of a CEO coach, you have to have two roles. Often that CEO coach is on the board. Well, the board requires governance, and governance requires that we protect the shareholders, not necessarily the CEO. At the same time, as a coach is there to help the CEO. And sometimes those roles come in conflict, and sometimes it results in having to say something to the CEO he wouldn't expect to hear.
If an entrepreneur were just getting funded today, what would you say to him he should expect from his first few board meetings? What's that going to look like for a brand new entrepreneur?
I think the first thing is the surprise about the amount of time to prepare. A board that gets together and listens to the entrepreneur is not a good board. A board that gets together after having at least 3 or 4 days to study information and materials that the company has sent to them in advance is probably a much better board. An entrepreneur that presents the status and talks about the things that have gone right and the things that have gone wrong, but in a short enough time that there's time for the board to speak for at least an hour out of a typical 2-hour board meeting. And an entrepreneur who brings in some of the vice presidents and others who can give presentations, but short ones, is one that's going to get a lot out of their board. I attended a board meeting just today where I finally had to refocus the board at the end of 2.5 hours from just making presentations into a board that had a chance to give some reactions and responses. And I thought that was a poor board meeting and said so. And that, in fact, the only good thing about it was they sent information to us 3 or 4 days in advance. The bad part of that was I was prepared to talk about that information, and we never got to it.
It's a learning curve with lots of things, and certainly for a CEO to manage his board and harmonize with their objectives for a meeting, too. I often say perhaps entrepreneurs are going to be surprised at how much time is spent on the numbers. Is that what you find, too, Dave? The revenue forecasts, the cash on hand, that's all going to be scrutinized quite closely, isn't it?
It depends on the stage of the company, but it's always to be scrutinized. But in the cash sense, which is, I guess, the most important single thing we look at in young, early-stage, fragile companies, often, depending on the stage of financing, we have a 13-week rolling forecast. We want to know what the burn is each month, and we want to know the cash-out date. Those are 3 things. The rolling forecast is prepared by management and talks about where payroll hits and when the cash gets low and whether or not some new cash is coming in. So we watch the flow, kind of like the ebb and flow of a tide. But the cash-out date is the absolute date that we focus on. And because money doesn't come that easily to all these companies in a second round, it really is something that scares the entrepreneur, rightfully, keeps them up at night correctly, and keeps the board focused on the need to make a business that people will invest in the second time around or the third.
So that implies that many of the companies that you're involved with have really finite resources, is one way to put it, huh?
Very much. Now, I think 4 of the companies that I have financed through TCA have gotten venture rounds. That doesn't guarantee that they are free at that point in time, even with $4, $5, $6, $7 million. Because they ramp up the business and requirement that comes from the venture people saying, this is a time now to really prove that you can build this business and use this money to make that proof.
So that paints a picture for me that no matter how much money they have, they're probably going through it. The pressures of that cash out point are still there. Sounds like no matter how much money
and
they
that's
have.
A surprise because most of them will give you a business plan that says, with this $5 million, fill in the blank, of which I need $1 million now at the angel stage, I'll be able to be self-sufficient. And rarely that happens, but only rarely. And
so that's a little bit of naivete on
much.
The part of the entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. Taking venture money often means that you're using it to build and therefore spending it, not using it as a cushion and therefore saving it.